I never thought I would do something like this, but my love for my son left me no choice. Ethan was my world, and when he told me about Samantha, I felt happy at first. She seemed perfect, smart, confident, and so charming. But there was something in my gut I couldn't ignore. I had seen too many people hide their true selves behind smiles and sweet words. I needed to know if Samantha was really the right person for my son. So, I made a decision. I got a job as a cleaner at the office where Samantha worked. Every day, I swept the floors, dusted the desks, and cleaned the break room, but my eyes were always on her. I watched how she treated others, how she laughed, how she spoke to her coworkers. At first, everything seemed normal. She was polite, cheerful, and full of energy. But the longer I stayed, the more small things I noticed began to pile up. There were moments when she took credit for someone else's work or subtly made someone else look bad just to shine. I watched her lie about minor things and twist the truth to make herself look better. Most people wouldn't notice these small acts, but I did. I could see patterns forming, little cracks in the perfect image she showed Ethan. My heart ached, because I didn't want to see my son hurt, but I also had to keep going. It wasn't easy. Every day, I had to pretend I was invisible, sweeping around her, listening to her laugh, all while keeping my feelings hidden. Sometimes I felt guilty, thinking maybe I was going too far. But then I'd see her manipulate someone, even if it was just a tiny thing, and I reminded myself that I was protecting Ethan. I learned her routines, the way she reacted when she thought no one was watching, and the small lies she told when it served her. I even noticed how she treated the people who were weaker or in need of help. Those moments were the most telling. They showed the side of her that Ethan couldn't see yet, the side that could hurt him if I didn't act carefully. Some days, I wanted to step in, to warn Ethan or confront her, but I knew that would ruin everything. I had to see the full picture before making a move. It was like a delicate dance, watching, listening, and never letting her know that I was there for a reason beyond cleaning. By the end of those first few weeks, I had pieces of the puzzle. I could see the truth in small gestures, in the way she smiled when someone else failed or how she covered up her mistakes to appear flawless. I knew I had to keep observing, because my son's heart was at stake, and I couldn't let anyone play with it without knowing who they really were. As the days went by, I started noticing things I hadn't seen at first. Samantha's charm was real on the surface, but beneath it, there was a pattern. She had a way of making herself look better by putting others down without anyone realizing it. One day, I saw her take credit for a project a coworker had spent weeks on. The coworker looked confused and frustrated, but Samantha just smiled and nodded, acting like it was all her idea. My heart sank. If this was how she behaved when no one important was watching, what would she do with Ethan? It wasn't just work. She told little lies about her past, stories that didn't add up if you paid attention. She made herself sound like she had faced struggles and overcome them, but I noticed inconsistencies. Sometimes she would say one thing to Ethan and another to her friends or coworkers. She was building an image of perfection, but it was fake. Even worse, I noticed the way she interacted with Ethan's friends. She would subtly plant ideas in their heads, trying to isolate him or make them favor her opinion over his. She smiled, laughed, and acted kind, but she was controlling situations quietly. I felt a tight knot in my chest. I loved my son so much, and I could already see how she could influence him in ways he wouldn't even realize. Ethan, of course, was completely blind. He praised her constantly, telling me how amazing she was and how lucky he felt. Hearing him speak like that made me ache. I wanted to scream, to tell him to open his eyes, but I couldn't. I had to keep watching, keep learning, and wait for the moment when the truth revealed itself. I told myself this was for him, for his safety, and for his future. Then one afternoon, I witnessed something I couldn't ignore. Samantha was faced with a choice that didn't directly involve Ethan, but it involved someone weaker, someone who trusted her. Instead of helping or being honest, she chose to benefit herself. She lied and manipulated, pushing that person into a difficult position for her own gain. My stomach twisted as I watched. This wasn't a small selfish act anymore, It was deliberate, calculated, and it showed the side of her I had been trying to confirm. I stayed hidden, silent, as my mind raced. If Ethan ever saw this, he would be heartbroken. I knew I couldn't let this go unnoticed. This was my first clear evidence that Samantha wasn't the person she pretended to be. She wasn't just a little flawed, she was willing to hurt someone to protect herself or get ahead. From that moment on, I became more alert, more careful in my observations. Every word she said, every small action, had meaning. I couldn't make a mistake. My son's happiness was on the line, and I had to know exactly who I was dealing with before it was too late. After seeing Samantha's first real betrayal, I knew I had to pay even closer attention. But soon, I noticed something even more worrying. She wasn't just selfish toward strangers or coworkers, she had started manipulating Ethan. At first, it was subtle. She would suggest that he skip a family dinner so he could spend more time with her, or she would hint that he should support her ideas at work, even when it wasn't fair. Ethan, trusting and kind-hearted, didn't see the manipulation. He thought he was making his own choices, but every decision seemed to benefit Samantha more than him. I felt a wave of worry and anger. My son, the one person I wanted to protect above all else, was being influenced in ways he couldn't even notice. I thought about confronting Samantha right away, about telling Ethan everything I had seen. But part of me hesitated. What if I was wrong? What if I overreacted? I couldn't risk pushing Ethan into confusion or making him doubt someone he loved without proof. Instead, I decided to document everything in my mind. Every word, every action, every tiny lie or manipulation was stored carefully. I started creating a mental map of Samantha's behavior, tracking patterns, inconsistencies, and moments where she subtly pressured Ethan to act in her favor. It was exhausting, and part of me felt guilty for spying, but I reminded myself that this was about protecting him. This wasn't about revenge yet, it was about seeing the truth clearly before making any moves. Days passed, and Samantha's manipulation became more apparent. She would use compliments to make Ethan doubt himself, or plant ideas that made him question his own judgment. She smiled sweetly while doing it, never leaving a trace of her intentions, but I could see through it. I felt the weight of every choice she was influencing him to make. Then one day, I noticed something that made my heart race. Samantha paused in a hallway, glanced around nervously, and seemed to look directly at me, even though I was hidden in the corner. My pulse quickened. Was she suspecting that someone was watching her? For the first time, I felt the tension of my secret work turn into danger. I had to be more careful now, more calculated. One wrong move and my cover could be blown, and Ethan might never see the truth in time. From that moment on, I became even more cautious. I had to observe without being seen, record everything without leaving evidence, and be ready for whatever Samantha might do next. The stakes were higher than ever. I couldn't let my fear or hesitation stop me. I had to protect Ethan, even if it meant walking a fine line between secrecy and confrontation. And somewhere deep inside, I knew that Samantha's next move could reveal her true nature completely. I just had to wait, watch, and be ready for it. I knew that watching Samantha wasn't enough anymore. I had to see her true nature under pressure. I needed a test, something that would force her to make a choice and reveal who she really was. I planned carefully, making sure Ethan would never suspect a thing. I wanted to know if Samantha would protect herself at his expense, even in a small situation. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. Samantha mentioned that Ethan had been offered a small bonus at work for a project he had led. I subtly created a situation where the bonus could be questioned, making it look like Ethan might lose it if the truth about the project's success wasn't properly explained. It was a small thing, but I knew it would show me Samantha's priorities. When Samantha learned about the situation, I watched closely. At first, she acted worried, smiling at Ethan and offering to help. But then her actions became clear. She suggested bending the truth, quietly discouraging Ethan from defending himself fully. Her plan would protect her own image and avoid trouble for her, but Ethan would suffer the consequences without knowing why. She didn't hesitate. She lied and manipulated the situation to her advantage, all while pretending to care. My stomach sank. This was the confirmation I needed. Samantha wasn't just subtly selfish or controlling, she could actively harm Ethan if it helped her. I felt a mix of anger and relief. Anger at her behavior, but relief that I finally had proof in my mind, a clear picture of her true character. Ethan, as usual, didn't see it. He thanked Samantha for helping and praised her for being so thoughtful. He had no idea that she had pushed him into a position that could have hurt him. Watching him, I felt both sorrow and determination. He trusted her completely, and that trust was exactly what Samantha could exploit if I didn't act carefully. From that moment, I knew the stakes had grown much higher. Samantha was no longer just a person I needed to observe, she was a potential threat to my son's happiness and well-being. I had to anticipate her next moves and plan accordingly. Every interaction, every suggestion she made, had to be analyzed. I couldn't afford mistakes or hesitation. I also realized something important about myself. Watching her manipulate someone I loved was painful, but it also gave me clarity. I needed to protect Ethan, and I had to do it in a way that wouldn't expose my actions too soon. Samantha had shown her true side, and now the challenge was how to reveal it to Ethan without hurting him unnecessarily. That day, I left the office with a heavy heart but a clear purpose. Samantha had failed the first major test. I knew she was capable of deeper lies and manipulations, and that made me more alert than ever. I understood now that this wasn't just about observing, this was about strategy. I had to be patient, careful, and ready for the next move, because her next choice could be even more dangerous. After Samantha failed the first test, I thought I had a clearer picture of her. But soon, I saw that her manipulations were getting worse. It wasn't just small lies or bending the truth anymore, she was actively undermining Ethan's opportunities. At work, she would casually suggest to his manager that he wasn't ready for certain projects, making herself look more competent while making him appear less capable. She smiled while doing it, acting helpful, but I could see exactly what she was doing. My chest tightened every time I watched her twist the truth to her advantage. It hurt me deeply. Ethan trusted her completely, and here she was, shaping his life in ways that could harm him long-term, all to make herself look better. I felt torn. On one hand, I wanted to confront her immediately, to call her out and protect my son. But on the other hand, my maternal instinct screamed at me to wait, to make sure I had everything documented and understood. I didn't just want to protect him from a small mistake, I wanted to make sure he could see the truth clearly before it was too late. To help Ethan without revealing my identity, I started leaving subtle hints. A misplaced note here, a carefully phrased question there, small nudges that might make him notice inconsistencies in Samantha's behavior. I didn't want him to feel like someone was spying on him, and I didn't want Samantha to catch on. Every move had to be careful, measured, and invisible. It was exhausting, but necessary. Meanwhile, I noticed changes in Samantha. She seemed restless, looking over her shoulder at moments, acting just a little too alert. I didn't need to hide myself from her anymore, she was beginning to feel the pressure without knowing why. I smiled quietly, knowing that she was starting to sense that something wasn't right, even if she had no clue that it was me observing her every move. Even with this small satisfaction, I couldn't ignore the emotional toll. Watching someone manipulate my son, controlling his life and trying to elevate herself at his expense, hurt more than I expected. At times, I found myself questioning if I was doing the right thing by watching silently instead of confronting her. But deep down, I knew that patience was the only way to protect Ethan fully. If I acted too soon, she could cover her tracks, and he might never see the truth. I realized that Samantha's ambitions weren't just harmless pride. She was cunning, strategic, and capable of hurting people to get what she wanted. That understanding made me more determined than ever. I had to keep guiding Ethan subtly, preparing him to see her true nature, while making sure Samantha had no idea that her world was starting to shift. By the end of the week, it was clear that the next move would be critical. Samantha was feeling the walls closing in, though she didn't know why. I had set the stage, and soon she would have to make choices that could reveal everything about who she really was. The tension was rising, and I knew the moment of truth was approaching faster than either of us realized. For weeks, I had been careful, keeping my distance while watching Samantha closely. But one afternoon, I felt a chill run down my spine. She had started noticing little inconsistencies in my cleaner story. A misplaced mop, a question about why I was always in certain areas, or a glance at me that lingered too long, small things, but enough to make her suspicious. My heart pounded. I knew one wrong move could blow my cover and ruin everything I had been carefully planning. I had to think fast. I smiled politely, adjusted my tone, and answered her questions with vague but believable details. I acted clumsy, distracted, and harmless, everything to reinforce the idea that I was just a normal cleaner doing my job. Samantha raised her eyebrows a few times, but I could see her trying to make sense of the inconsistencies. I forced myself to stay calm, even though my mind was racing. This was the closest I had come to being discovered, and the tension was suffocating. Meanwhile, Ethan had started noticing small cracks in Samantha's behavior. He saw moments when she was impatient with coworkers, or when her charm slipped for just a second. But he couldn't put it together, and I could see the confusion in his eyes. He wanted to trust her, and part of him still believed in the perfect image she had created. I wanted to warn him, but I couldn't yet. If I revealed myself too soon, Samantha would cover her tracks, and the truth might never come to light. The pressure was building on every side. I had to stay hidden, remain alert, and guide Ethan subtly without exposing myself. It felt like walking a tightrope, one misstep away from disaster. I reminded myself that patience was key. I had to survive this close call and wait for the right moment to expose the truth completely. Then, just when I thought I had a moment of relief, something happened that made my stomach drop. A major secret from Samantha's past surfaced unexpectedly. One of her coworkers mentioned an incident that had been carefully hidden, a story that didn't match the image Samantha had worked so hard to create. She froze for a moment, and I could see her trying to think quickly, trying to control the situation. But I also noticed her fear. This was the kind of crack that could destroy her carefully constructed image if it reached the wrong ears. I knew instantly that this was the turning point. Samantha's past, combined with her manipulations, would eventually catch up with her. The tension in the office, the unease she felt, and the suspicion building in my mind, all of it was leading to a moment where the truth could no longer be hidden. I had narrowly avoided exposure, but the danger was far from over. As I left that day, I felt both relief and dread. Samantha was teetering on the edge, Ethan was starting to notice, and I had to be ready for the consequences. The next few days would decide everything, and I could feel that the walls were closing in faster than ever. After weeks of careful observation, I knew it was time for Samantha to face the consequences of her own actions, but I couldn't do it openly. I had to make sure Ethan saw the truth for himself, without me stepping into the spotlight. It was the only way he would understand her real character. I started planning a situation that would force her lies into the open, but still look natural, like a mistake she couldn't control. The opportunity came at a small office meeting. I knew Samantha would try to take credit for a project she hadn't fully contributed to, and I quietly set the stage. I left evidence in the right place, created subtle hints, and made sure Ethan would notice. Then I stayed hidden, watching every reaction. As the meeting began, Samantha acted confident, smiling and explaining the project as if it were all her idea. But Ethan, for the first time, hesitated. He asked detailed questions, and I could see her struggle. She tried to cover up, adding small lies and shifting the story to protect herself, but the cracks were obvious. Her confident facade faltered, and her panic started to show. I watched her closely, noting the way her voice wavered, the small gestures of nervousness, the moments where she avoided eye contact. Ethan's eyes widened as he realized something wasn't right. He looked at her differently, questioning the woman he had trusted so completely. Samantha's charm was failing her, and it was clear she wasn't prepared for this kind of scrutiny. I felt a mix of emotions. Part of me was satisfied, finally, Ethan could see the truth. But another part of me knew this wasn't the end. Seeing someone you love hurt by deception is never easy, and I wanted to protect him from too much pain. I stayed hidden, allowing the confrontation to unfold naturally, knowing that my silence was crucial. If I intervened too soon, Samantha could recover and manipulate the situation again. Samantha's panic grew. She began stumbling over her words, contradicting herself, and trying desperately to regain control. It was painful to watch, but necessary. Every lie she had built over weeks was unraveling before Ethan's eyes, and he could finally understand the depth of her manipulation. By the end of the meeting, Samantha was emotionally shaken. She had been exposed without anyone pointing a finger, and I could see the realization in her eyes. Her carefully constructed image was crumbling. Ethan looked confused, hurt, and angry, but also more aware than ever. For the first time, he was truly seeing who she was. I left that day quietly, knowing my role wasn't over. I had orchestrated the confrontation, but Ethan still needed to process everything himself. Samantha had been shaken, but she was dangerous and unpredictable. I had to stay alert, patient, and ready for whatever she might do next. The emotional confrontation had worked, but I knew this was only the beginning. Ethan had seen the truth, Samantha had been exposed, and I had to prepare for the fallout. The next steps would decide the course of everything that followed. After the confrontation at the office, things didn't immediately change, but I could see a shift in Ethan. For the first time, he was noticing the inconsistencies, the small lies, and the selfish acts Samantha had been hiding for so long. It was subtle at first, a pause before he responded to her, a questioning look when she smiled or explained something. He was starting to put the pieces together, and I could feel the tension building. It was painful to watch because I knew the realization would hurt him. Ethan had trusted Samantha completely. He had praised her, defended her, and even ignored some of the red flags I had seen. Now, seeing the truth would feel like a betrayal not only by Samantha but by his own judgment. I kept my distance, allowing him to notice on his own, knowing this was an important step for him to understand who she really was. One evening, Ethan confronted Samantha. He asked pointed questions, the kind that came from careful observation and sudden awareness. She tried to answer casually at first, but he pressed further, noticing the gaps in her stories, the way she avoided certain topics, and the moments where her charm faltered. Her confident, perfect image began to crumble under his questioning. Samantha's reaction was immediate. She became defensive, raising her voice, trying to shift blame, and twisting her words to make herself look innocent. But Ethan wasn't fooled this time. He could see the fear behind her eyes, the hesitation, and the small lies she was using to save herself. He felt a mix of anger, disappointment, and betrayal, and it was clear she hadn't expected him to notice. I watched silently, feeling both relief and tension. Relief because Ethan was finally seeing her for who she really was, and tension because Samantha was dangerous and unpredictable. She could react in ways that would cause even more pain if she tried to fight back or manipulate the situation further. I had prepared for this moment, but the uncertainty of her next move kept me alert. Ethan didn't just confront her with words. His tone, his expressions, and the way he held himself showed that he had grown stronger. He wasn't the same person who blindly trusted her anymore. Samantha's carefully built image of perfection was shattered in front of him, and I could see panic rising in her. She realized that the control she had maintained was slipping away, and the consequences were about to hit her. By the end of their conversation, Samantha was exposed completely. She had no easy way out. Ethan had seen her true character, her selfishness, manipulation, and lies. But how she would react next remained uncertain. Would she crumble under the weight of her mistakes, or would she try to fight back, desperate to regain her hold? The house was silent after their confrontation, heavy with emotion. Ethan was shaken but stronger, Samantha was cornered and anxious, and I knew that the next chapter would be decisive. The stage was set for the final reckoning, and I had to stay ready for whatever came next. After Ethan confronted Samantha, I knew the final act had to be carefully managed. She tried to cover up her mistakes, weaving more lies and excuses, hoping to convince him that everything he had noticed was wrong. But this time, I had already set things in motion so that the truth could not be hidden. Every inconsistency, every selfish act, and every manipulation she had done was now visible to Ethan. She could twist words or cry for sympathy, but the evidence was undeniable. Ethan was devastated. He had loved her, trusted her completely, and now he was seeing her in a new light. But through the pain, I saw him grow stronger. He realized that loving someone blindly could leave him vulnerable, and that he needed to trust his instincts and judgment. Slowly, he began to pull away from Samantha, ending the relationship despite the heartbreak it caused. It was a painful step for him, but a necessary one. He had been deceived, and now he had the clarity to protect himself in the future. Samantha, on the other hand, faced the consequences of her actions. People she had manipulated and lied to began to notice the cracks in her behavior. Her reputation, carefully built over months, started to crumble. Friends and colleagues began questioning her, and the charm she had used to cover her selfishness no longer worked. She realized, too late, that manipulation has limits, and that once the truth is seen, it cannot easily be erased. I watched as she struggled, and though I felt satisfaction, I also knew this was not about cruelty, it was about justice. Finally, after the chaos settled, I decided it was time to reveal myself to Ethan. I explained everything, why I had taken the cleaning job, why I had observed Samantha so closely, and why I had created situations to expose her. I told him that my actions had not been to spy or control him, but to protect him from someone who could hurt him deeply. I could see the mix of shock, confusion, and relief on his face, but also trust. He finally understood that every move I had made was out of love and a desire to keep him safe. We spent time talking, rebuilding our connection. He admitted he had been blind, but he also acknowledged that the experience had taught him to see people more clearly. We laughed quietly at small things, remembering moments of relief and lessons learned. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, knowing that he was safe and that he understood my intentions. Samantha was left to face the consequences of her actions alone, while Ethan and I began healing. The pain of betrayal had been real, but so was the lesson it left behind. Trust, patience, and love had prevailed, and we could finally move forward, wiser and stronger than before. After everything that had happened, Ethan and I finally had a quiet moment together. The tension that had built over weeks of lies, manipulation, and betrayal had eased, and I could see him breathing a little easier. He looked at me with a mix of understanding and gratitude, and I could tell he finally saw why I had done what I did. He realized that every step I had taken, every careful observation, and every subtle nudge had been to protect him. He no longer saw my actions as extreme or controlling, he saw them as the sacrifices a mother makes when her child's happiness is at stake. We talked openly, about Samantha, about trust, and about the lessons learned from all of it. Ethan admitted he had been blind, but he also acknowledged how much he had grown. He understood that love and trust were not about ignoring warning signs or blindly believing in appearances, but about seeing people clearly and choosing wisely. For him, this was a turning point, a chance to become stronger and wiser without carrying the weight of betrayal in the dark. I reflected on everything I had done, on the lines I had crossed and the risks I had taken. Protecting someone you love sometimes means making hard choices, even when they feel uncomfortable or morally gray. I had stepped into a world of secrets and observation, acting in ways I never imagined I would. But in the end, the safety and growth of my son mattered more than my own doubts or fears. The difficult choices had been worth it, because they allowed Ethan to see the truth and avoid long-term harm. As for Samantha, her downfall was quiet but undeniable. She had been exposed, humbled by the consequences of her own selfishness and manipulation. People began to notice her real character, and the image she had carefully built crumbled. There was no dramatic confrontation needed, the truth had revealed itself naturally, and it was enough. Her mistakes were hers to live with, and in seeing them, Ethan and I could finally move forward without fear or deception. That day, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't expected. Ethan was stronger, more aware, and ready to live his life with the lessons he had learned. I was vindicated, not for revenge, but for doing what love demanded. I had protected him, guided him subtly, and allowed him to witness the truth for himself. The pain of betrayal was real, but the empowerment that came from truth and awareness was stronger. The story ended not with anger or resentment, but with clarity, growth, and emotional resolution. Ethan had seen who Samantha really was. I had fulfilled my duty as a mother, and the lesson was clear: true love sometimes requires testing loyalty, and no lie, no matter how carefully constructed, can hide forever. The truth always finds a way to surface, and those who act with honesty and care will ultimately find peace and strength.